Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a strategic report that makes a really bold claim. It argues that 2026 isn't just going to be another tense year on the world stage. No, it's something bigger, a true watershed moment where the fundamental rules of the game are being completely rewritten. And that quote right there, it gets straight to the heart of this analysis. The argument isn't that the global system is under attack from some rival power. The central and honestly pretty shocking claim here is that the whole thing is being dismantled from the inside out. So yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? What happens then? Because a move like that sets off a massive chain reaction around the world. So let's walk through the report's logic, step by step, and see how this whole thing could play out. Okay, so the first domino, the biggest risk this analysis points to, isn't a war overseas or some economic collapse. It's a systematic, deliberate transformation of the political institutions right inside the United States. And this is where things get really interesting. The report makes a key distinction here. It's saying we've moved past simple norm breaking, politicians pushing the envelope, which we've seen before. We're now in the territory of systematic transformation. It's not just about challenging the rules anymore. It's about fundamentally rewriting the entire rulebook to weaken those institutional checks and balances. And this isn't some abstract idea. The report gets very specific, detailing a quick and targeted erosion of the very things designed to keep executive power in check. We're talking about purging civil servants for not being loyal enough, getting rid of independent watchdogs, and turning agencies that are supposed to be impartial into political weapons. And that affects everything, from whether you can trust economic data to whether the government can even respond effectively to a crisis. So you have to ask, what's the economic impact? Well, it's huge. When a system starts to work this way, money and opportunity don't flow to the most innovative companies, but to the ones with the right political connections. Getting ahead, according to this analysis, becomes less about what you can build and more about who you know. So let's see how this thing snowballs. Because a major shift inside the US never just stays inside the US. The report argues it creates a massive power vacuum on the world stage, and that totally changes global relationships, starting with its own neighbors. The analysis even gives this new foreign policy a name, the Dawn Road Doctrine. It's basically a modern, way more aggressive version of the old Monroe Doctrine. We're talking about the US making direct, take-it-or-leave-it demands on its neighbors and making it clear it's willing to use force to back them up. And this table just lays it out so clearly. You can see just how specific these demands are. For Canada and Mexico, it's direct pressure on trade, on investment, on natural resources. And for Mexico, the report points to a very real threat of US military intervention to go after drug cartels on Mexican soil. And this sort of transactional what's in it for me approach isn't just for its immediate neighbors. As the US turns inward, the report says it leaves this vacuum that puts traditional allies, especially in Europe, in a really tough spot. The analysis paints a picture of a continent that's suddenly getting squeezed from all sides. You've got Russia ramping up its hybrid warfare from the east, an unpredictable Turkey to the south, political division growing from within, and then the real kicker, on its western flank, the one country that was its main security guarantee, the US, is now seen as completely transactional. This new, unstable world doesn't just make old conflicts worse, it actually creates openings for totally new kinds of conflict. We're talking about a world where you don't just win with armies anymore. You win with technology, with control over resources, and with pure economic muscle. Now, the report uses China as a prime example here, and it introduces this specific economic term, involution. Basically, it's a nasty downward spiral where there's just not enough consumer demand, so companies get locked in this brutal fight for survival. And here's how that death spiral works. People aren't buying enough, so companies slash prices and cut jobs. But that just means people have even less money to spend, so demand drops further, and companies have to cut again. It's a deflationary trap. And the report argues that Beijing's policies are actually making it worse by just pouring more money into manufacturing instead of finding ways to get people to spend. So what does China do with all that extra stuff it's making? Well, it exports it. And the result, according to the report, is total dominance in what it calls the electric stack. Just think of this as the entire foundation for our electric future. From mining the raw materials to building the batteries, this is the tech that's going to run everything from our cars to the next generation of military drones. And as you can see from this chart, China's control over this critical supply chain is just overwhelming. And at the exact same time, warfare itself is undergoing this massive shift. It's getting cheaper, way more accessible, and increasingly autonomous. I mean, just look at this chart. The explosion in drone incidents in just 4 years. It's absolutely staggering. And let's be super clear, this isn't some niche, futuristic threat. In the war in Ukraine, drones are reportedly responsible for 70% of all casualties. These things are now a primary weapon on the battlefield, and they're spreading like wildfire to groups like drug cartels and militias. And finally, the report highlights how even essential resources are being turned into weapons, and there's no resource that's becoming more contested than water. In hotspots like the Nile Basin or the Indus Basin, water shortages aren't just an environmental problem anymore. They're a direct trigger for real-world conflict. So what does all this add up to? Well, the report's conclusion is that we're not just dealing with a few separate crises anymore. We've entered a period of systemic, interconnected change where all these risks are feeding off each other. And here's the bottom line for anyone trying to figure out what to do next. The old playbooks are useless. The basic assumptions that have guided decisions for decades about political stability, about global trade, about who your allies are, all of that is being rewritten as we speak. Which really just leaves us with this final, challenging thought. If the past can no longer predict the future, how in the world do you adopt? It suggests that to survive and even thrive in this new era, you need a completely different way of seeing the world and planning for whatever comes next.